Well, good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to welcome Dan Meridor back to the ISS. In recent years, he's spoken always with great fluency and insight at ISS events in Tel Aviv and in Geneva, and so we're delighted that he's found time on his visit to London in between a series of high-level meetings to address the Institute at our headquarters. A long-serving member of the Knesset, where for a number of years he chaired the Foreign Affairs and Defence Committee, Dan Meridor's government service has spanned an impressive range of responsibilities. In previous administrations, he held the cabinet portfolios for finance and for justice, and since 2009, he's been Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Intelligence and Atomic Energy. Dan Meridor's subject for today is Israel's security and the changing geopolitics of the Middle East. At issue here will be the ultimate character of that change. The regional convulsions, the upheavals, the revolutions of the last year mark an enormous release of human energy, with every possibility of enlarging the role of accountability and human rights in regional governance, of strengthening the prospects for economic development, and in doing so of exerting a variety of benign geopolitical effects. It also has to be conceded, however, that the region is still in the early stages of a transition that does not yet have a clear or a proximate terminus. What happens in respect of the evolution of Egypt's political complexion and the violent contest underway in Syria is and has to be of great concern to Israel. And these developments are also vital influences on the regional calculus of an Iran that may now feel under some pressure and have incentives of seeking ways to strengthen its hand. As these circumstances mature, effective management of the relationship between Israel and the US remains an important and absorbing task for both sides, as the recent summit between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu showed. So we very much look forward to hearing the Deputy Prime Minister's analysis of these matters and of what the geopolitical future might hold. Dan Meridor, welcome again to the Institute.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody here. I'm happy to be at the Institute again. The spring that comes over London in a different way than it came to the Arab world, a different spring. And let me cover 4 issues in my remarks, and then I'll open it up to questions that you may have, an answer that I may have to your questions. I'll speak on the Arab Spring, on Iran, on Syria, and on the Palestinians. The first thing I have to say is something that people who deal with intelligence hate to say, and this is that we had no clue it's going to happen when it started happening a year ago. Had you asked me in January last year whether this is possible, I would tell you you're out of your mind. It's so stable, everything is in place. What sort of crazy idea you have? And we had no clue. The Israeli, American, British intelligence had no clue. I have to say that Mubarak had no clue that in a day or two he and Omar Suleiman will find themselves where they found themselves. And this, I think, leaves you with a very important lesson of humility. When we assess the future, we plan for the future, we base it on our assessment. We have good intelligence, I believe. Some of us are intelligent people. And in 90% of the cases, we'll know what is going to happen. But in this remaining 10%, we may be totally out of touch with reality. And then things happen that you never dreamt of, and everything around you changes in no time with important consequences. And I think this is an important lesson. So humility is one. Second, never be sure that you know what will happen. It may be the opposite. Plan with some uncertainty. There's an inbuilt uncertainty in this world, in this part of the world, and we are there. When one looks at the development in the Arab Spring, the first thing one has to say, we are still in the eye of the storm. It's not over. We don't yet know how it's going to end. But some things can be said already in a look from above, so to speak. I think that the era of globalization, the era of technology, our modern era, caused the collapse of walls, collapse of borders, and the Western ideas of democracy, the Western discourse of human rights, liberties, did penetrate on the Western technology of television, internet, social networks, did penetrate the Arab world. A world that was in a way secluded in the masses from these ideas, which is why there was no Arab democracy in the Western style, in no part of the Arab world. But what we saw in the square in Cairo, in the Tahrir Square, Liberation Square, and other places, was not another revolution. We had revolutions in the Arab world. It was very different. First thing, it was not violent at all. Against the image of the Arab violence, no, it was not violent. Second, it did not come from a military officers group or a political party. It was brought about by people in the street, people like all of us. And more importantly, the slogans, the ideas were all Western ideas. They were not taken from the Muslim vocabulary, they were taken from the Western vocabulary. And this is, I think, this gave a lot of hope to many people that if the dictatorship in some of these countries is down, we'll see Thomas Jefferson landing on the Nile, creating a new democratic republic, or in any other part of this world. Now here, I think it's an interesting development. It's a worldwide development, historic development. But then what came out of it is interesting, not less interesting. In democracy, we say that the government needs to be elected by the people. The majority rules. This is a basic tenet of democracy. It's not a sufficient condition, but it's an important condition, and no doubt vital. So what you have now is that dictators have fallen, 3 or 4 of them, and now the people speak, and they go for election. But what if the majority doesn't want democracy? The majority sees democracy only as a way to get to power, but not in terms of allowing the opposition to speak against it now once in power. Freedom of expression, against religion, against government, equality to women, equality to everybody. The basic tenets of democracy are not election and majority. This is an important element, but the most important is basic human rights, that government is of the people, by the people. People can change it and they can talk against it. So what we see in some of these places is majority rule and the ascent to power of political Islam. In some cases, it looks, can I say, benevolent. I think Tunisia is a case that so far may have been proven it, maybe because of the very intensive French influence of the laïcité, of secularism in Tunisia. I don't know enough, but maybe. What about Egypt? We don't yet know how it's going to develop. We're going to have election for president in July. What will it be like? Will they want the law of the land to be the Islam law, the Sharia law? Will they be democracy, the Western style? An open question. And the same applies to many parts of the Arab world. With the collapse of the dictatorships, those who collapsed, by the way, no monarchy fell, by the way, only non-monarchy dictatorships fell. This is an interesting point. What comes next is still an open question, of course. From our perspective, on top of the human interest in what happens with our neighbors, we have a keen interest in the relationship with Egypt and Jordan. The Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty that had been signed by Sadat and Begin in 1979 has changed the Middle East dramatically and was the anchor and the basis for stability and for no war and peace. One may say what one wants to say about President Mubarak, but for 30 years he kept the peace treaty with us. Not one Egyptian, not one Israeli was killed. And there was no war in the Middle East of any significance because Egypt was outside the circle of war. Jordan followed some years later in 1994. So, of course, we have a keen interest in maintaining the peace between Israel and Egypt. I think it's the basis on which the stability of the Middle East is built. what do we know? What will come next? I think as much as one can say that objectively Egypt has no interest in going back to war with Israel. I think that they have a clear interest objectively in maintaining the treaty that was signed. I think they understand that if a treaty that was signed will be rescinded or abolished or torn to pieces once there is a change of government, there won't be any more peace treaties in the Middle East if you can't keep an agreement with a change of government. So I have confidence and hope that this will be the case, and the Israeli-Egyptian relationship will stay the course and continue to be a basis for stability in the Middle East. But we need to look at it very closely. We can't do much about it. We look at it and we hope for the best, but it's a question mark that has been put where we thought there are no question marks at all. When one looks at the entire Arab world and one sees what happens in Yemen, in Tunisia, in Libya, and in other places, it's a question of your where you want to look. You can look for dangers and risks, and there are many. But I think that as there are many dangers, there are many opportunities as well. Things are changing in the Middle East, and I can say that more countries, Arab countries, than in the past would like and do like to have contacts with us. Not always on the table, sometimes under the table, but they see in us something that for some of them is very positive. So rather than looking just for the risks and the dangers, one needs to look for ad hoc coalitions, alliances that can be created because of the second topic I'm going to touch, which is, of course, Iran. If in the end of this struggle between Iran and the United States and the rest of the world, Iran does get nuclear, this will be a different world from the one that we know. The first thing that one can say is that there's a real danger of a nuclear race in the Middle East. Listen to what the Saudis are saying, Egyptians used to be saying. You hear more and more talk, if Iran gets nuclear, we get nuclear. This is the last thing we want to see developing in the Middle East. The second thing is if Iran does get nuclear and become the dominant power in the Middle East, some countries around it in the Gulf area, which now are quite scared of this development, may have to join Iran. What sort of Middle East, what sort of Gulf area, what sort of oil prices we'll see then is left for your imagination. I think it's quite clear it's a very, very negative and dangerous development. The third thing is that if you look on the Muslim world as a whole, you see in many countries small groups that take action, that resort to violence. Not the majority in most cases, but they exist. And they have one thing that most of us don't. They have direct line to God, they know what He wants, and they act for Him. It could be Taliban, it could be Jihad, it could be Al-Qaeda. What nations are they? Islam, not any specific nation. It could be Hezbollah, Hamas, not national identity, but religious identity. And for some of them, the fight between Iran and the West is a Kulturkampf, is a civilization clash. And a victory for Iran is a boost for all these groups that threaten the stability and the prosperity of large parts of the Muslim world. So for all these reasons, I think that it's quite clear that the last thing the world wants to see is a victory for Iran in the race for nuclear capability, nuclear military capability. And I didn't mention Israel in that context, but of course we have a keen interest here because Iran says openly, just recently it was repeated by the president, that we have no right to exist, and it's a question of time until what the language he used was this tumor is removed to the Middle East. So when you hear a country speaking like that, and you know they don't play it by the rules, and they have direct line to divinity, and they know exactly what to do, and they want to get nuclear on top of their involvement in terror and with Hezbollah and with all the other parts of the Arab world, it's not a happy sight, and one needs to take it very, very seriously. And there is, interestingly, a very unprecedentedly large coalition built here. Almost all the Arab countries, with the exception of Syria, wants Iran to be stopped. And they say it, some loud and clear, some not that loud, but very clear. And the Western world, and we, of course, and many others. And now we are in the process of a sanctions regime that was bolstered just recently by the use of SWIFT that will not allow international financial transaction to be carried out by Iran, which is, I think, may deal a heavy blow. The European Union decision that will take effect starting July on oil products, American decisions and others. There's a real effort to stop Iran from getting nuclear. And you have to add to this the President of the United States, President Obama's speeches recently, where he not only did not rule out a military option, saying all options on the table, but he ruled it in by saying including a military option. This is something he never said in the past. And adding what he added several times, we will not go for containment, we are going for prevention. So there's an upscaling of this rhetoric, and I hope that what is the message that is sent from here or from there is first determination. We have a clear goal. Iran is not going to get nuclear. Second, we are determined that it will not get nuclear, and we will persist until it doesn't get nuclear, until it stops this march toward nuclear capability. And we are using, I mean the world is using all sorts of means to stop it, and they don't preclude anything to reach that goal. So, and this, of course, is a major issue, maybe the most important game in town. It will shape the role of Iran in the Middle East. It will shape the relationship within the Middle East. It may indicate something about the power of the world or of America in the 21st century. Will it be listened to, or will it be overlooked? It's a major contest. I think this is the one thing that, if there's one thing that we need to look at and be very serious about, it's the Iran race to nuclear capability. Will they be stopped or not? I'm not in the habit of, unfortunately not all my colleagues agree with me on talking of military options and giving all sorts of deadlines and routes and all sorts of scenarios. I think it doesn't help anybody but the Iranians. I think they should know that the options are on the table for all of us. America said it, the others say it. I don't think that adding deadlines or red lines or giving exact descriptions is something that will satisfy anybody but some of you who may want to have headlines for the press, but I'm not going to provide them today. A related issue is Syria. What happened in Syria definitely is a massacre, and it's carried out when television is there, where the networks are there, where everybody sees what happens, and it goes on happening. In Syria, we saw a new coalition being built. 3 partners helped Syria against the Arab League, against the rest of the world. 2 of them are Iran and Hezbollah. They went out of the way to help Syria, Assad, to stay in power by sending weapons, by sending money, by sending people, advice. Both Iran and Hezbollah, the same thing from 2 sides. And from somewhat more remote distance, the Russians that blocked by a veto the Security Council resolution and let him continue. And he did, brutally, successfully militarily in 2 cases, in Homs and in Idlib. And we don't know how it's going to end up. Now, there are 3 angles to look at, I have to say, from the Israeli perspective. One is the human angle. What happens there is a massacre. It's inhuman, it's awful. And to let it go like this without doing much for the world is a very bad lesson. If this goes on and the world can't do anything, what do you say to others? What do you say to people who are looking there and say, do something? Are we not as worthy as the Libyan people that you helped and so forth? This is one way to look at it, which is basic, and I mentioned it first. Second is a sober way of saying, all right, if Assad goes, who comes next? Is it Muslim Brotherhood? Is it chaos? I don't know the result. I can't say that I know what will happen if the regime changes in Syria. The third angle from which I look at it, and this is to me now decisive as an Israeli, I think that if the alliance between Syria and Iran is broken, it's very important. I look at it from the Iranian perspective. Syria is the only Arab country that allies with it, that aligns with it, that goes with it, that has an alliance with Iran. The entire Arab world doesn't want Iran to dominate the Muslim and Arab world. Syria is an exception. Lebanon was occupied through Hezbollah, but it's not a really independent country. And from our perspective, this creation of this unholy alliance of Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah is a source of great danger and instability for us and many other regimes in the region. So if this regime is changed, and I don't know that it will be, but maybe, and it may be a real hit, a real blow dealt to the Iranian foreign policy and self-assurance in the Middle East, which is why I think this should be the result, but I have no way of affecting it. If we support somebody in Syria, it's to its detriment because the regime will fight the Jews. That's the best thing they can do. So we can't do much about it, but this is our perspective of what happens in Syria. Look at what do they do to each other and think what they will do to other enemies if they have the power to do this. No limits, nice English, good television shows of the couple, but atrocities, brutal actions, cannons, launching mortars, rockets on their own population, something you never thought could have happened when the world sees, but it does happen, some kilometers from our border. Palestinians. For some reason, it was marginalized. People speak less of it. Let me state my understanding and my notion, my belief that it's bad for us that we don't have negotiations. It's bad for us that time passes without any resolution. The continuation of the status quo is not good. I'm afraid there is a mistake on the Palestinian side thinking that as it's not good for us, it may be good for them. I think it's not a zero-sum game. If I look at developments all over the Arab world and the Muslim world, and the strengthening of religious powers and the weakening of national identity, I see the same thing in the Palestinian camp, the decline of PLO power and the growth of the Hamas power. And I'm afraid that if the PLO people don't have the courage to take decisions quickly, we will lose and they will lose. And it's time that negotiations are resumed. We have tried relentlessly in recent 3 years to get them back to the table with no success. Just 3 months ago, a book was published in New York by Mrs. Condoleezza Rice, a voluminous book. I didn't read all of it. I read some parts of it. And she tells the following story. In 2008, Prime Minister Olmert came to her, asked her to come over and have dinner with him. And he said, I want to put an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is not the book. I know it was after 280 meetings that the teams had on finding a solution. And he says to her, she reports in the book, I think I know what it takes for Abu Mazen to agree. You need something on Jerusalem, something on the refugees. The rest is easy. And he says to her what he has on his mind. He will give him 100% of the land with 6% of swap, which is sort of what they wanted, more or less. On security, there will be arrangement. It's not ideological, it's practical. On Jerusalem, you offer something I wouldn't have offered, but you offered to have a Palestinian capital in the Arab neighborhood of Jerusalem and some international regime in the whole Holy Basin. And something symbolic about refugees. 5,000 of them may go to Palestine, 5,000 symbolic thing. And she writes there, I didn't believe my ears. We have an agreement here. She even actually didn't tell all the details to Elliot Abrams and David Welch who were with her, although she has full confidence in them. And then the morning after, the day after, she goes to Ramallah to Abu Mazen, her book, and I quote her because she's an objective authority, I think, not an Israeli politician, God forbid, and she says, I offer this to Abu Mazen. Now I say, think of it, the man was fighting all his life for this, and he gets it from the Israeli Prime Minister. He knows that if he says yes, The morning after, all the world leaders will land here and he'll have an agreement. Who can run away from it? And his reply, and here I quote verbatim, is the following: how can I tell 4 million Palestinians, only 5,000 go home? In other words, it's not territory, it's not occupation, it's Israel. We want the refugees to have a right to go, and not 5, 50, 4 million. From that day on, I didn't see any readiness to go back to the table, not because they are afraid of negotiation. There were negotiations, they were concluded, and there was no reply, and maybe he doesn't want, or maybe the Hamas wouldn't let him. But we are in the last hour. We need them to come back to the table, and we need them to have the courage needed to take a final decision. It is not easy. Things are changing, and we need to relate to them. But the paradigm is there. It's 2 states. We agree to that. They agree to that. President Obama recently outlined the basic guidelines. We did not reject them. They haven't responded yet. 2 states is agreed. What may not be agreed, which is the crux of the matter, that this is the end of the conflict. 2 states and continue the conflict is nothing. For this, one needs the leadership that they need to show, and I hope that it will be shown, but time is running out. We need them to come back to the table. So here is the Middle East as we see it. Iran issue is dominating. If they win, forget about the PLO. It's only Hamas, Hezbollah, all those will be strengthened. The new Middle East challenges us politically and militarily. The number of rockets aimed at Israel, the terror that is used, the cyber terror, all this is a new world, a new challenge. But if leadership exists, I think decisions may be made that will put the danger of Iran in place and stop the Iranian race and resume relationship and negotiation between us and the Palestinians. But nothing will happen without the leadership needed. Let's hope we'll have it there. Let me pause here, and now the floor is yours for questions. I forgot the data of the exact time of attack and routes of attack, but all the rest is free for you. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and then the microphone will reach you. And if you could then give your name and affiliation for the Deputy Prime Minister's benefit, that would be excellent. First, second row, Lindsay Hilson, please, from Channel 4.
Lindsay Hilson from Channel 4 News. Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, first of all, I wonder if you could comment on a very tragic news event that we've heard about this morning, which is the shooting in Toulouse of 3 children and 1 adult at a Jewish school. And then after that, I would like to ask, the assessments, intelligence assessments we're reading at the moment suggest that Iran is not building a bomb as such, but developing a capability. And actually, any Israeli strike would have very little impact on that. I wonder if you could comment on that afterwards.
Well, I heard the story of Toulouse this morning, like all of you. I have no information of my own. Murder is awful. Murder of children is even worse, if one can have levels of atrocity. And for me, of course, if it's attack on Jewish children, I have a unique feeling about that. I don't know more than that. We had cases of attacks on Jewish institutions in recent time in the world, including in France years ago. But let me not add, because I don't know who did it and why they did it. It's awful, it's bad, tragic. The other question about Iran, I said I had to preempt questions like this because I'm not in the habit of giving any of my thoughts, which I do have about a possible military attack. I don't think it's something that in good families you do. You don't talk of these things. I don't want to use the American film line, if you want to shoot, don't talk. If you remember that one. I don't think that I don't say this, it's just bypassing. I think that talk about this doesn't help, and I'm not going to go into that. If the Americans say it, as the American president did, and Secretary Panetta recently, that they not only do not rule out, that they rule in a military option if Iran doesn't listen and doesn't stop. That's enough. I don't think that we need to add to this. And of course, calculations will have to be made if decisions are brought to a decision-making point. But I can't give you any headline on this. Sorry.
The gentleman in the second row in the purple shirt, please.
Hello, my name is Bijan Farhoudi from Voice of America in London. Tomorrow is Nowruz, the beginning of the Iranian New Year. As the Iranians are going to celebrate Nowruz, they're extremely worried about an Israeli attack on their homeland. And at the same time, your country president, Mr. Perez, has talked about the friendship that exists between the two nations despite the animosities between the two governments. Is the Israeli government concerned about the damage that this might cause to the friendship between the two nations? And do you think a war with Iran will help the regime, will solidify its basis, or will it help it to collapse? Thank you, sir.
Well, it's maybe my English is not clear enough. I may say it in other languages if you like. I agree with the president and agree with history. Iran and Israel for years had no conflict at all. The peoples are two ancient nations of thousands of years of history. I don't want to cause damage to the Iranian regime, but the first Zionist ruler in the world was the king of Persia, Xerxes, who gave Jews the right to return to Palestine, to the land of Israel in the 6th century BC, after they were exiled by the Babylons. So this is in our memory. In the Bible, you can read it. So we had very good relationship with Persia, with Iran, all those years. And until 1979, Iran and Israel had very good relationship. Came in this new regime, starting, by the way, by a spring, by Mr. Shahpur Bakhtiar. You may remember speaking about the Shah and the atrocities of the Shah, dictatorship of the Shah, and we need to see a new spring, a new life for the Iranians. And then they fell into deep darkness, I would say, in terms of democracy and human rights. And they use a language that we haven't heard for years. Elimination of Israel was not a term used until it was used until 1967 by Arab countries. They stopped using it. Iran introduced it again. They added another layer to the conflict. It has never been a religious conflict. They make it a religious conflict. They say it's not a political thing. It's against the law of Islam that there would be a non-Muslim state in this land. And they act in terms of terror. Just recently, 3 attacks by Iranian intelligence were held in New Delhi, in Tbilisi, and in Bangkok just a month ago. And so this is a regime that think that we should not exist by the law of divine law, and arms our enemies like Hezbollah with tens of thousands of rockets, and continues to act like this. So with this regime, of course, we don't feel friendship. We feel just the opposite. But the Iranian people, we have nothing against them. I think objectively they should have nothing against us. We don't have any conflict, any border conflict, anything. Unless you impose on them this crazy idea that Israel is an aberration of history, it should be removed. If this is what they say and teach day and night, what should we do with them? So, and the issue of war, let's leave aside.
Jonathan Paris, please, in the front row.
Mr. Minister, I was struck by your remarks on Egypt, in which you said to the effect that if they do away with, rescind the treaty, the Egypt-Israel treaty, it will make it very difficult for Israel to be expected to enter into new treaties in the future, since they're rescinded upon change of government. It seems to me that's precisely what the Salafists, those who really want to do damage to the treaty, want. They want to make it impossible for Israel to be legitimated through peace treaties. So, in effect, if they're the ones who are deciding, then I fear that the threat of not having future treaties will not be of any benefit to deterring them.
I'm not going to convince the Salafis. If Egypt, I hope not, will be in the hands of Salafis, then of course there's no future for peace, because they say it. But Jonathan, I don't think didn't say, and I don't think that Egypt should or will abrogate the agreement with us. I said the question were raised, but until this minute, we haven't heard from anybody in the Egyptian authorities today, and even of the Muslim Brotherhood, that they will abrogate the agreement. And I take it as a positive sign. You could have thought that once Mubarak is out, they will say we are not bound by the agreement. They didn't say it. And I think it's a very positive sign. I don't threaten them in any way. I'm not in the habit of threatening. Even on Iran, they didn't use the word, the language of war that much, of course, not with Egypt. That is a neighbor, that's a neighbor in peace with us. And I wish for them and for us that they continue the relationship that we have and even deepen it if possible. I'm just saying what happened was a complete surprise to us. Think of it, for 90 years the Muslim Brotherhood was banned as a movement all over the Muslim world. The only place where they got to power was in 2005 when Hamas got to power by election in the Palestinian territories. And they got Gaza. This was a Muslim Brotherhood branch that had power for the first time in history. And lo and behold, now they've got Egypt. What it means, we don't know. We read the writings, we read the philosophy of the Muslim Brotherhood from al-Banna from the beginning. But it's now 2012. Egypt has a lot of problems, economic and otherwise. They have minorities to deal with, Christian minorities. The Copts have just lost their leader yesterday. And I wish for them, because we want a satisfied neighbor, not a worrisome neighbor, that they will do it right. So I didn't say, and I don't mean to threaten them, on the contrary. I want Egypt to continue the relationship that they have with us. And I wish it would be the case. But I just said, it came as a complete surprise to all of us and to the Egyptian regime as well. Yes, please.
So Dana Allen here in the front, please, from the ISS.
Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, thank you. That was a compelling and very lucid presentation. And one part of it was an anecdote about, what I take to be a serious Israeli concern about Palestinians not being willing to see an end to the conflict in terms of the refugees analogy, anecdote you used. I want to sort of put a different perspective to you, which is not a Palestinian perspective, but an American perspective. It is an American perspective, and I'll explain what I mean in just a second. It's an American perspective that there's an equally troubling problem on the Israeli side, that the construction of settlements is harmful. It does no good to Israel or to the peace process and is very harmful to it. And by American perspective, I mean the perspective of this administration, obviously, although it's not talking about it as much as it did at the beginning. Every previous administration, at least formally. And I would also argue the mainstream foreign policy community in Washington and the United States. Now, I can't prove the last part, but I believe I have an insight into that. And so my question is, do you recognize this American perspective, and how would you respond to it?
I do recognize it, and let me give you my personal view on this. What I say now is what I would have had as Israeli policy. It is not yet a formal government policy, so I have to make it clear not to make a mistake. I said it several times in Israel. Change in the American policy, which is very positive. President Bush President Bush II was the first to write, and President Obama reiterated it yesterday, some weeks ago in his speech, that the borders that need to be set between Israel and the state of Palestine, the idea to which we agree, the paradigm that we all accept, would not be the 67 lines, would be based on the 67 lines with mutually agreed swaps. This is what Obama said in his speeches just recently several times. Add to this what President Bush wrote about the borders changes need to take into account the demographic changes on the ground. In other words, we know more or less the principles. The principles have been reiterated for the first time ever by the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in a speech in the Knesset in May last, I think 12th or 13th of May, before he went to Washington. And he said, let me outline, I don't quote verbatim, let me outline the borders that we want to have in the end of the negotiation process. We want to include in Israel, on top of Israel and Jerusalem, we want to include the settlement blocks. This, from this government point of view, is a far-reaching statement, because he didn't say the word only, but I say the word only. He didn't say anything else. Now, this is almost the same thing, or very close to what the American president said. Why do I say all this? Because it's entirely clear to everybody, including the Palestinians, that the borders to be agreed upon will not go back to 67. For example, in Jerusalem, there are now, take the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. There's the old city, there's the Jewish quarter there, inhabited by Jews for generations. banned from Jews when it was occupied by Jordan for 19 years, from 48 to 67. This is beyond the Green Line. If one says, don't allow Jews to live in the old Jewish quarter, this is settlement, we won't accept it. Nobody of sense will accept it. It will be part of Israel in the end. And other parts that are easily seen as parts of Israel. So my policy would be, if I were to decide, it's not the government policy, that we should not stop building for Jews in the areas that are going to be part of Israel, but we should not build in the other parts. And this is the coherence that may make our policy more understandable. This is my view on this. I would add, I don't want to go into that any further, but I would add that it's strange that wherever the border is in the end, the notion is accepted that Israelis can be Jews and Arabs. Israel has over 200,000 Arabs living in it. It's fine. But the idea that Jews will stay in Muslim land is impossible. They cannot live there. How can they live with the Jews? This is crazy. So it doesn't mean that the border will be there. The border will have to be decided. We know more or less where it's going to be if there is an agreement. But the idea that this land has to be without any Jews in it is somewhat strange. If there is an agreement, the people who live there will have to decide. They want to stay there, have to abide by the law of the land and be citizens of that land, or inhabitants, but residents. If they don't, they have to move and go to what will remain Israel in the end of the process. But to accept as a principle that the only place on earth where Jews cannot live is the heart of the land of Israel because it may become Palestine is somewhat strange. Or that the government will issue an order, everybody can build provided he's not Jewish. The Arabs build all the time. It's somewhat strange. To make this an issue, I think it's an excuse why not to go back to the table. You want to come to the table, talk, and then finish and have an agreement. And the line will be here, this will be Israel, this will be Palestine. For the first time in history, we'll have a Palestine. And then all the rest will follow from that. But to make this a precondition and not coming to talk because you don't agree on the final outcome, I think is a bad policy. This is what I've said. What I meant when I mentioned Abu Mazen should go back to the table and talk with us rather than present preconditions why not coming to talk with us.
Thank you. There's a gentleman 4 rows from the back on this side of the room. If you just keep your hand up. Yes, you. The microphone will get to you.
Andrew Fraser, you spoke of the risk of a nuclear arms race throughout the region in the Middle East. If, as part of the solution in negotiation to the Iran bomb problem, there was a comprehensive agreement to have no nuclear weapons throughout the whole region, would Israel be happy to comply with that, and would Israel accept international inspectors to ensure that Israel doesn't hold nuclear weapons?
Well, I think you may be a minimalist. You want a nuclear-free zone. I'm much broader in my vision than you. I want a nuclear-free world. Why just the zone? Why should we limit it just to the Middle East? Let's have a nuclear-free zone. Of course, Russia, America, Britain, everybody who has nuclear weapons will give it up and it will be a much safer world. But as we are not yet there, let me say the following. This is, I think, interesting to note. The Arab countries, some of whom are still our enemies, some of whom are our friends and neighbors in good relationship, but most of them, if not all of them, believe that we have nuclear weapons. We never, and I don't reject or approve whether this is true. I don't say yes or no. We don't answer this question. But none of them, to this point, had ever said, if Israel has it, we'll have it. But when they hear Iran is going to have nuclear weapons, they say, if Iran gets nuclear, we get nuclear. What does it mean? It means that the real threat to their regimes is not the potential of maybe Israel has it, but if Iran has it. Because Israel has nothing to do with revolutions in the Arab world, trying to topple down the regime, trying to make all of them pious, extreme Islam version of life. So I wouldn't connect everything together. The other thing I want to say is, there is the NPT treaty, the Non-Proliferation Treaty regime. And there were 4 or 5 cases where nations who signed the agreement violated the agreement, didn't respect it. One of them has nothing to do with the Middle East, it's North Korea. But the others are Iraq, that signed an agreement but never kept it. Libya, that signed an agreement, never kept it. Iran, that signed an agreement, never keeps it. And Syria, that signed an agreement, never kept it. So our agreements guarantee. We have a tendency, because we are an open society, to keep agreements. If we don't, the press will be the morning after, because everybody will leak it in no time. To sign agreements and then to be the only one to keep them in that region that has so many violators of agreements is a proposal that I would consider twice or three times before answering in the positive. But in the meantime, let's start negotiating peace in the region. If Iran stops saying Israel should not exist, and by the way, they get away with it. Nations go on having relationship with Iran, diplomats in Iran. Though they're a member of the United Nations, and we are a member of the United Nations, one member says the other shouldn't exist, and everybody says, okay, it's just rhetoric. I think if Iran changes, if there would have been a different regime in Iran, the Shah was there. Who cared? When you have a regime like this, that uses this language and this ideology, and with the certainty of God with you, and wants to get nuclear and uses terror, all this together is a combination that the world never saw. Which is why one sees that broad and deeper coalition, as I said, most of the Arab countries and all the Western countries and other countries joining in trying to stop this from happening. And if the idea is that we have an agreement, then they will keep the agreement. They have agreement now. They don't keep it.
Thank you. Nigel Inkster here in the front row.
Thank you. Deputy Prime Minister, you mentioned in an earlier response activities by what you termed Iranian intelligence in places like Delhi and Bangkok. I wonder if you can be at all more specific in terms of attribution. Is this MIS, Quds Force, and how seriously do you rate Iran's capability to undertake this kind of asymmetric warfare, either directly or through proxies and surrogates such as Hezbollah and possibly even what's left of Al-Qaeda?
To be more exact, I would say, as far as we know, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard have under them force that they call Al-Quds. Al-Quds is Jerusalem in Arabic. Al-Quds is the saint, the holy. Quds is holiness in Jerusalem. And this force is behind the attacks on us as much as we know, and I think we know, in all these three places. In one of them, Iranians were caught red-handed in Thailand. In India, just recently, the Indian police said that they had the indication that it was the same group. And in Tbilisi, the same people. So it was Iranian Revolutionary Guard through Al-Quds, headed by Mr. Qasem Soleimani, and the groups that they sent around the world to cause damage, to terrorize, and to kill our diplomats. Killing diplomats is one other thing that one doesn't do in the world. Even those who kill don't kill diplomats usually. Not that I'm for killing, but they don't have any rules binding them. And this is what they tried to do. They didn't succeed, thanks to good intelligence or thanks to bad luck or whatever. They didn't succeed. But they are doing that. Do they have the potential of killing people? 20 years ago, exactly, I think, there was the commemoration of the attack of Hezbollah on our embassy in Buenos Aires. They blew up twice, the Israeli embassy, then the Jewish Community Center, in 2 years gap between them, I think 82 and 84. 92, 20 years ago. And the Argentinians, while investigating it, found out that the Iranians were behind it or helped it. So Iran is capable of doing sorts of things. I mean, everybody can do this. Killing is not that big issue. I mean, if you're ready, if you don't have any constraints, you kill people. That's easy. So yes, they can do things. They need to be stopped. I hope that they are stopped. I think they haven't succeeded. Just recently, it was proven they tried. They haven't succeeded. So if one couple contends with them, we can, I think, need to stop them. This is what we are doing, and others are doing.
Thank you. Gentleman here in the front row. Front row. Yes.
Pete Apps from Reuters. A couple of fairly fundamental questions that I think would get beyond your dislike of discussing specifics. Is there anything the current Iranian regime could do that would genuinely convince the ruling establishment of Israel that they were not working on a nuclear bomb, at least covertly? And secondly, if you believed the choice was between a messy conventional war in the Middle East and a nuclear Iran, which one would be the the most dangerous choice, particularly given what you're saying about not necessarily understanding the rise of Islamism in the region and the fact that no one saw the Arab Spring coming?
Well, the first thing I think they don't need to convince us. The first they need to convince is the Arab world. If you don't want a nuclear race, Saudis will not wait for us to have their bombs. You need to convince them. They may be less easily fooled than we. The other Arabs, some of whom have a lot of money and will do it, as they say. And the rest of the world doesn't want to see Iranian domination of the Gulf area and all that follows from that. What needs to be done, I can think of a lot of steps that can be taken, but it all stems from their understanding they need to stop and step down from the track. They've proposed in the past, you remember, to take out part of the fissile material that they have enriched already. They spoke of the TRR some 2 years ago, they stopped it. If what they have enriched by now, they will give away to somebody else, if they stop enriching. If the monitoring system that are all sorts of things can be done to prove that it is stopped. They have by now enriched about 5.5 tons of low enriched uranium, the 3.5% enriched uranium. They have about 110 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium. And it's when one reads the report of the Atomic Energy Agency of Vienna, not our agency, Mr. Amano issued a report in November describing the military plan of Iran with names, with organization, how it was done, and how it was temporarily stopped in 2003 when the Americans looked threatening after the invasion to Iraq, and then how I think it has 4 or 5 cases until recently, of researchers and experiments that can be explained only as trying to bridge the gap that they need on the weaponization of the fissile material into the missiles that they're continuing to build. So if a decision is made there to stop or not to go there, then the mechanism to verify it and to do it will be found. We're not yet there. So why should I go into detail? I gave you some examples, but other things can be done. Now, you asked him, what do I prefer, a nuclear bomb on my head or a high explosive, regular high explosive on my head? I don't like neither this nor that. So I don't know this option. I just say that the nuclear Iran, with the same policy, with the same ideology, supporting the same groups, will give much more freedom to act to all its proxies and allies, and to itself. Because they may think they're untouchables when they have a nuclear weapon and nobody will mess around with them. So this is the option. Of course, stopping Iran is not an easy task because they want to get a bomb. And one sometimes says, why should I do A, B, C, whether it's financial, economic, diplomatic, or war, whatever the means is. And it's tough decisions. But you always need to compare it to the alternative. The same Iran, the same policies with a bomb. How will you deal with that then? And of course, this is why I think the American president took that significant language recently, and Secretary Panetta and the British government, not less impressive, and French and others, not only because of us, not only even because of the Arab world that wants Iran to be stopped. I think that they understand it's a change of the rules of the game, the balance of power. So the need to stop Iran is, I think, widely understood. And how to do it? Preferably by the options that is being pursued now quite vigorously by more and more nations. Let me give one example that can, I think, tip the scale even further. Russia was on board with the sanctions 2 years ago. They joined the UN and they voted for the sanctions, which is why we got the UN resolution. They didn't veto it, they didn't abstain. Why is Russia important? Because without Russia, you can't get, if Russia opposes, you can't get a UN Security Council resolution on this. There are countries, India is one, that says we'll join the sanctions if it's done by the Security Council. If Russia gets back on board, as they were, and allows another round of sanctions through the UN, this may be a very important development. The elections in Russia are over. America and Russia, or the West and Russia, have many things in common all over the world, not just Iran. If Iran is put as the number one priority on the Western priority list, and there's talk with Russia on joining back the camp of which they were a part of in 2 years ago, this may qualify the the sanctions to a much higher level.
What about China?
I don't want to add much about China, but China never voted against, never vetoed a resolution if the Russians didn't. So I don't know what the future holds for us. India is an important country and a friend of Israel, a friend of the United Kingdom, a friend of the West, but still they buy a lot of oil from Iran. And if they can be, and by the way, Iran used the Indian territory to carry an attack on our diplomats in New Delhi just recently. Not a very friendly act by Iran. So I think that India needs to ask itself how it joins the sanctions. And as I said, if the Russians that have a key role here go back rather than put a foot in the door on Iran and on Syria and join the international community in doing the good, not other things, I think we can see a much better sanction regime than we see now.
Bill Neely from ITN, please, in the middle of the left-hand side. If you just stick your hand up, please.
Just following on the Iranian question, I mean, do you really believe it is possible that sanctions, that computer viruses, that whatever, can stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon? How confident are you that will work?
Nobody has a guarantee to anything in our world. I know that the Iranians did suspend enrichment in 2003. Why did they do it? Were they a nicer regime? Different people? No. They thought they have to. The world looked threatening to them. They stopped it. If you have time, Google the speech or the statement issued by the Supreme Leader Khomeini, the first leader, the revolutionary, the father of the revolution, when he decided to stop the Iraq-Iran war in 1988, I think. You read the statement, not describing God Almighty. I mean, it may say something. A very clear example and a case of realpolitik. Very courageous. We cannot win this war. We are paying a heavy price. We need to stop it. So can I say that these people don't listen to logic? They do listen if the logic is clear. Iran is not North Korea. North Korea acts, or used to act, I don't know about now, as an autarky, an isolated country. They don't need the world. They can live on their own. I don't think it's that clear now, but this was the attitude. Iran has a tradition, a nation, a proud nation of merchants, of people with international connection in economy, in culture. They were part of the West until 1979, very advanced in science. Then there's a lot of leverage to countries like this. If the world gets serious about it, tells them, this is too high a price for you to pay, stop it, and we'll be with you. So can I give you a guarantee? I can't give you a guarantee. If I weigh all the options, I think there's enough chances there of success that one needs to follow it as much as one can, provided that they don't fool you and just play for time. This is what one speaks of these days.
Thank you very much. With apologies to the many other people who wanted to make an intervention, this will have to be the final question. And the gentleman at the back standing has been very patient, so if you say yes.
Thank you. Jerry Lewis. Mr. Meridor, could you just give us an assessment, Israel's assessment, of the situation in Lebanon, its capability or inability to stop Hezbollah firing rockets onto Israel, and if you've got any comment on the situation with Hamas in Gaza? Thank you.
Poor Lebanon, a country that was once called the Switzerland of the Middle East, the only country in the Middle East that has a majority of Muslims. Still the Christians were very powerful and had a very decent life. Unfortunately, it's changed, and Hezbollah became the strongest power in no comparison to the Lebanese army. They have now around 50,000 rockets. 50,000, all aimed at us. Think of the number. Don't know if any country on earth is so highly respected to have so many rockets aimed at it. They have the most sophisticated weapons Iran can give. They have intelligence assistance, everything, exercises, everything they can think of. And they, in fact, are the strong power military in Lebanon. The Lebanese army, unfortunately, may not be a match for them. But the leader of Hezbollah, Mr. Nasrallah, calls himself the personal emissary of Khamenei, of the supreme leader of Iran. His allegiance is to Iran. Now there are two or three masters he may be serving: Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. He is a Lebanese party, after all. So it's a more complex identity. It's poor Lebanon, because Lebanon should have no conflict over border with us. We have a border that is set by the UN, and the UN Security Council some years ago said we are exactly on the border. There's no problem border between us and them. And there could have been an agreement. We don't have any reason not to have an agreement. But if Hezbollah reigns over Lebanon, and it dominates Lebanon, and they are working for the Iranians, that's bad. Now, if I go back to what I said earlier, if Iran-Syria alliance is broken, if it is broken, then I believe it's quite detrimental for Hezbollah, because this is the way through which Iran can do a lot with Hezbollah. One other reason to help break down this alliance, which may or may not happen, I don't know. So the Iranians, the Lebanese should know that Hezbollah may cause a lot of damage to Lebanon, as it did in 2006 in the war in Lebanon. They started the war with us. They kidnapped our soldiers. We responded. It developed into a war of 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and that caused damage to us, literally, but 10 times more to Lebanon. And we don't want to do it. But what alternative do we have? They deploy their rockets in villages, in towns. This would be the result. So I hope they'll find a way to get rid of Hezbollah. For this, you need Syria and Iran to stop acting as they do now. Hamas, different story. A big question to know. Hamas says, again, religiously Israel is not legitimate. In the end, it will not exist. So even if we wanted to talk with them, they wouldn't, because they say we have no right to exist. But the question is the following: suppose people are realpolitik people and say, talk with them. They are the rules. They are the rulers. Why do you not talk with them? So first, there are the 3 conditions that the world gave them, the quartet. They have recognized Israel, to abide by previous agreements, to respect them, and to refrain from violence. They say they will not do either of these. So if they don't respect previous agreements, what should we talk with them about? New agreements not to be respected. But moreover, suppose somebody talks with Hamas. This is the death blow to the PLO. Think of it. What does the PLO have that Hamas doesn't have? PLO says we are the sole representative of the Palestinian people. Hamas says to them, not anymore, we represent them, which may explain some of the hesitations of the PLO people. If we legitimize Hamas by talking with them, this may be a very heavy blow. I don't want to use more dramatic terms, to the PLO. So this is where we are. On Gaza, there is deterrence that's worked quite well since 2009, but they are building their arms as well. Iran has 2 organizations there. Hamas is less closely related, although they have connection with them, and more closely related is the Islamic Jihad. And both of them are equipped by Iran. They have around 8,000 rockets there. I think equally divided more or less between Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Recently, Islamic Jihad launched rockets against us. Hamas didn't. We'll see how it develops. So if you thought that we live in a dull neighborhood where nothing happens, it's quite interesting.
Well, some of the aspects of the lively neighborhood that you live in are taken up in the hot-off-the-press issue of the Institute's journal Survival, which has articles on Jordan, on Turkey, on Egypt, on Libya, and the US-Israeli relationship. And it's a journal that we're now very happy also to be offering in iPad format, if I can make that commercial pitch to all of you. If I could ask you please to remain seated until the Minister's party has left, but most importantly of all, can I please ask you to thank him for an extremely stimulating and informative...
Thank you very much. Thank you.